It's Barry again. I hope you all are having a wonderful time and learning a lot. Remember, I'm open to questions. If you need anything, just give me a holler, and I want this to be fun and easy and enjoyable for you. So today I want to talk about the proper use of how to use a rotary blade. In the tools video, we talked about some of the tools you'll need for using a rotary cutter, and I'll just go over those again briefly, and then I'm going to show you some tricks about how to use the rotary cutter. Okay? First of all, you've got to have a nice mat. The other tools that we talked about were the rotary cutter itself. Make sure that you get one that has a good locking mechanism in it. I like this rotary cutter. There's many different kinds, but it has a place here for my finger so I can easily grab, and then the locking mechanism is right there close by. Then I've got my long ruler. I also have this one. This one's only 5 inches wide. And I'm going to show you what I use this one for later. One of the things, and in the tools video, we also talked about the need for masking tape in your sewing room. And I use masking tape a lot. So let's say I'm going to cut some squares and I need them to be 4.5 inches. So I'm going to cut, and I'm going to lay my fabric out. And I'm going to cut 4.5 inches. Well, you know, a lot of us have distractions in our lives, and you know, things happen. So I'm going to put masking tape on that 4.5 inches. And sometimes I'll mark one down here and one up here. So that way, it's just a helpful reminder to me that when I'm sewing, or when I'm cutting, that this is the line I'm aiming for. And that's the line I want to line up on the edge of my fabric by masking tape. So one of the tricks that I was going to show you was, let's say that you're going to cut some squares that are 7.5 inches. Well, this ruler is only 6.5, right? So does that mean that I have to line my fabric up and use these numbers on the cutting board in order to get that extra inch? What you can do is you can take this cutting ruler and line up 1 inch here on the fabric. Line this one up 1 inch and hold it steady. Bat your 6.5 up. So you've got 1 plus 6.5, and that's your 7 inches. And then I'm going to line that up on the horizontal as well as lined up on the vertical and get a nice square reading. And then I only have to hold this one and cut. When you're cutting, you want to know that you're standing on a table that is the right height for you. If your arm is like too high up and you're having to kind of reach to get way to the end, okay, that's not good. You have a much higher chance of your cutting ruler sliding around if you have to reach for it. So it does make a difference for the table to be at the right height. You also want to remember that you want your cutting blade to be up and down, perfectly straight up and down, okay? And you want the blade to be riding right along the edge of your ruler. So I've seen some people on other videos where they're just like, okay, you just have to put your whole body on this thing to hold it down, because they're holding their ruler at an angle. I mean, they're holding their knife at an angle that pushes this way on the ruler. You don't want to do that. You want it up and down. Yes, you have to hold this firmly, but if you're holding your cutting edge straight up and down and not to the side or to the side, you're not going to have to put the weight of 20 elephants into holding down your ruler. So put it straight up. Also, if you're pushing like this, you have a much higher chance of your slipping around this way. And if you angle it this way, you have a much higher chance of just kind of heading off into the distance. Now, if you're worried about the knife, because they are very, very sharp, there are things called, they're called klutz gloves. Klutz, like if you're klutzy. And what these are is, similar to what chefs use, so that, and it won't cut. It won't cut through. So you put this on the hand that's holding this down. So if you're nervous about it jumping up and whacking your finger, this blade cannot cut through this glove. okay? And it's reversible, so you can use it on your right hand or your left hand. So we're going to use it straight up and down. Now the other thing that we need to be careful about, and I want you to see, when you're cutting, there's a horizontal line here and the vertical line. So you need to make sure that when you're cutting, let's say we're cutting 6.5 inches, so I'm going to line that up on the edge over here. This, I also always, when I'm cutting, you're always going to check both sides. So this side needs to line up exactly along the bottom, and this side exactly along this side. If I don't check both when I'm cutting, what you're going to get is what we call an elbow. So let's say that I'm going to deliberately cut this wrong so I can show you what I'm talking about. So let's say the pattern says you need 2.5-inch strips, right? So I line this up here, 2.5 inches here, and it's not straight across the bottom. So this is what happens if you cut it crooked. What you're going to get in your fabric is what we call an elbow. So do you see how when you lay this flat, this line is not straight, it kind of curves. So when you've got two strips like this that are not straight on the end, and you try to sew them together in your strip piecing, you're going to get pieces that are just have all kinds of waves and ripples in the fabric. Waves and ripples just don't really work very well when you're craving flat. When you're cutting your pattern pieces, you're always lining things up on a horizontal line and a vertical line so that you can get a nice straight square cut. Yes, try to avoid the elbows, and sometimes it's as easy as cutting off like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch along the edge to get that cleanness. Now, if you pre-wash your fabrics, you're going to have all kinds of jaggedy edge along both ends of your fabric, and so you're going to lose probably 1/4 of an inch right off the bat, just because of the washing and the fraying that happens when you pre-wash. I have this 12.5 by 12.5 that I love and I use a lot, but I don't use it on this because you don't want to line up your fabric. Let's say we're going to line it up here at 6.5 inches, and I'm going to cut to here. Oops, it stops. So now I have to move my ruler and line it up again, and you're not going to get an accurate cut that way. So this is the ruler that I use on the blocks, and this is the ruler that I use, whoops, this is the ruler that I use on the bigger pieces of fabric, the yardage. Now I want to talk to you for a minute about cutting extra wide fabrics. This is a bolt of extra wide. I think it's 108 inches, but it looks like it's a 60-inch bolt, but you can see that it's folded over 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 layers of fabric here. And now you can see when I unroll it, there's significant wrinkles in here. And this is not real flat, like the inside layer, you know, just not real flat to the outside layer. So when I'm cutting with the rotary cutter, first of all, I think you can see that this is wider than my mat is. And you can see that I cut down the side here and it's not straight. Part of that is because it's not laying right at the end. These two folds are not, they're just not even with each other, and all the wrinkles make it so it's very difficult to just line up your ruler and get a good solid straight cut. So if you're working with and cutting pieces with an extra wide fabric, what I recommend is cutting them 1/2 inch or wider than what you need. So let's say you need 3.5 inches. So I would cut it, you know, 4, 4 1/4, and then take that smaller piece and iron it really well. And then you can fold it and get a much better fold. Get this part to line, these two pieces in here to line up much better so that you can get a really good straight cut. It does make a little bit of waste, but it's less waste than if you think that you're going to get, you know, 3.5 inches, and then after you iron it, you're really only going to get, you know, a little bit of a section out of it, because it's never going to be perfectly straight unless you want to take the whole thing off the bolt, you know, everything off the bolt, and iron it down and get it really flat before you cut it. So extra wides can be really wonderful, but just watch for that, because any little wrinkle like this can really throw you off. One other thing we talked about in another video was about fuzzy cutting. So here's an example of what you would do if you wanted to fussy cut. So you're going to pick out something here in your fabric, and let's say we're going to cut out this cat right here. So you're going to decide how big you want your square, and then you're going to have to know what half is. So, you know, get your calculator just to be sure. And you're going to want to make sure that you get the exact center on top of the exact center of where you want the picture to be. So you set it up like this, and so let's say here we want this, we'll say we want this to be a 5-inch square. So we're going to put 2.5 right in the middle of the cat. Yeah, see, I told you quilters like cats, right? So here I have this cat fabric. So you're going to get him right in the middle, and then what you're going to do is you're just going to rotary cut here, and then you're going to rotary cut here on 2 sides. And then you'll turn this around and line up your pre-cut edges where you want you wanted 5, so you line it up, this side up with the 5 and this side up with the 5, and then you cut here and you cut here. Okay, does that make sense? So you're not just putting the big long ruler and cutting in straight lines and getting whatever you get. You're picking out exactly what you want. Another way you can do it is to make a cardboard template. The dollar store has cardboard that's, you know, really cheap. You can just cut out a square of what size you want and put it over that. Sometimes with darker fabrics like this, you can even mark it with a pen or get your chalk pencils and mark it, and then use those lines to cut. You can make some really cute stuff that way. Shadow box quilts are really cute that way. Remember, there are downloads and some things that you can print out that go along with these lessons, as well as the recipes and, of course, the cute cat pictures.